Okay. So I'm coming back for more. I am, just in coming into this, it occurred to me that I am extremely eager to make it through to get through rather the rest of this chapter. And the reason why is that it's my own practice as it relates to it. And I try to hold a, pretty decent boundary around like talking about my practice. But the thing I do want to talk about as it relates to a practice with parinama is that if you've ever done yoga or meditation or any type of like somatic practice, like any practice that's actually kind of like peripheral to something that we're doing here, there tends to be ebbs and flows, like, coming into it and receding out of it, and that certainly was my experience. I started doing yoga when I was in my 20s, early 20s. Was it early mid-20s? And I didn't really understand why I kind of, like I went really, like, hard into it, and then I just used to be like, "I don't understand why I stopped," and I actually almost depersonalize that because I tell stories about it in the book about how I noticed my like students when I taught do that, and also when I was like known for doing a lot of yoga, that people would talk to me about how that was their experience as well. But it had been mine, and I think one of the things is, first of all, if you're watching these and it's like, you're reading the book, you're doing a practice, you're following along with these readings, and you're being, like, maybe hard on yourself, like, "Oh, I should be doing more, I should be reading more." Like, first of all, this doesn't go quickly. Or no, but I haven't really, maybe you're the person, one person, I don't know. Certainly not even for me, and I could get into more anecdotes there. But the thing I wanna just talk about, which is I'm kind of eager to get through this chapter. There's about 10 more pages of it, and we're about to read the adaptations and holding pattern section. So we've made it through the initial development, basics, themes, so the learning about the hub, and then we've just made it through the interruptions and stressors, which are like understanding the impacting events that shape it to a certain extent. And now we're talking about knowing the like the resulting behavior patterns that sort of remain. And so it's really hard. And so this is the part I'm pulling out of my own practice to just bring forward in this particular like container, I guess, is that without two really important contextual parts, components of this practice, um, I can see like really walking away from it. And so this is why Parinama for beginners is structured the way that it is. And so within TPM for beginners, week 2 and week 3 are really, so week 2 is about this developing a positive, like really the whole thing about positive intent with ourselves. And and so actually I'm just gonna talk about what those, and then the second, so it's basically assuming positive intent first, and that the long pull in the tent in this entire practice is that there's nothing wrong with you. So as we're, like, working through deconstructing, softening, reintegrating aspects of ourselves that are, limiting, I'll call it, like, or constricting or whatever, a more fully lived experience, whatever, like, way it makes sense. Um, it's really, it can be like, it can be really uncomfortable. I'll use the word uncomfortable. It can be painful, it can be sad, can surface a lot of stuff, like, stuff can, like, bubble up. And if we don't have the central tenet that the things that are arising, we're trying to mindfully not let them attach to beliefs about ourselves that cause the need to, like, dissociate in a sense, like, it's like, "Oh, this is because I'm so weak," or, "This is because 'cause I'm such a piece of shit," or, like, "This is because oh, see, here we are again," like, so the thing is, like, when the difficult feelings are arising, this is why like the second week is about first assume positive intent with yourself. So in this practice, like whenever you're feeling lost or overwhelmed, it's the orienting principle is there's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with me. And to just find that as an orienting principle. The other is about emotional regulation and a budget. The notion that we really have a budget and a capacity to handle high voltage concepts. And the thing and some of the stuff that I don't cover in TPM for beginners is that it may be a lot less than we wish it probably is gonna be a lot less than we want it to be. Like the idea that we can handle a lot, you know, but to be able to handle intense feelings and be able to remain like, stay with them, it's like that can be another thing where it's like, but anyway, so that might be part of it where it's like, I should be able to handle more, I should, like, whatever, whatever. But those 2 tenets of being able to stay with this and so this is, me talking about staying in my practice right now that has been, like, pretty challenging, and I do have an intent with this, like, so my reason, especially actually for all these past 4, has been strengthening myself to become more of what I need to be to bring TPM into a broader place in the world. And so it has to do with my own, especially in the second hub, being able to really stand in my individuation and in my power. And in this fourth hub, it really is expanding my capacity to receive and also just to be able to have um a relationship with myself that's going deeper, that doesn't require me to need things from other people, so it creates a bit more of a cleanliness in my like, I don't even love that term, I'm gonna use integrity, an integrity in, working with other people where I'm not needing belonging from them, where I'm really finding this core within myself so that I'm not reaching into other people. It's been something that's been really important to me, which begin with like my financial stability as it relates to this project, that I don't need money from people who are doing it. That will be a part of this evolution in terms of its growth and sustainability. But that ultimately, that's what's driving this is that I'm not um, like, needing something from people that are, like, by needing this are, like, sort of in a way could consider, like, vulnerable in the need. So this has been my own process of strengthening this and expanding my capacity and becoming more dynamic and becoming more, um, yeah. So it's been hard. Okay, and so with that said, I'm bringing this back up that my orienting principle in overwhelm is to continue to work to accept my position and my state of mind and who I am in the moment, even when it's not, it's not like super easy. I'm building more capacity in that, like that it's spent in, and sometimes I'm spending more time than I really want to, in certain states. I mean, when I was writing the book, I spent a lot of time in like trance-like meditative states for extended periods of time. And I remember thinking like, "That was hard. This is really hard. This is really hard." I mean, and I did it when I was doing 4th Hub, and working on the book, I went into this stuff, but it's just I mean, it's like there's more aliveness to access, I guess, is the way you could put it. So, anyway, I wanted to share that. Just so the reason I wanted to share that is that if you are in this practice and there's any part of you that is like, I stepped away from it for a while, that I just wanna say that I think my understanding of how that can happen is that either the voltage can become too much, and as a result of that, I would say, first of all, be like, "That's okay, that happened," and the second of all is to really be mindful in terms of what the notion of progress is in this, when like, just be like, "Look, I'm not trying to, like there's nowhere to be, there's nowhere to go," like, you don't achieve, like, I don't know, like, there's no yeah, yeah. What a terrible product. There's nothing to achieve. Don't worry about it. Um, but the other part of it is that it's like anything that takes us out of like is like creates some sense of like a validation of like sort of an inherent badness. It's like, oh, I'm seeing the shitty parts of myself. Like that's where I mean that's kind of like a 1-2 punch with the overstimulation of like emotions and nervous system. So it's like it's like really, the assuming positive intent is kind of like the beginning of or like part and parcel of the development of this relationship, this loving relationship that we have with ourselves that we're cultivating here in the 4th Hub. So I'm gonna read a little bit about this, and, I guess, like, the key message I would have here is, like, the give yourself a fucking break message. Um, yeah, yeah. Give yourself a break, and if there's anything to be, like, to add as far as, like, okay, like, in terms of my sustainability in the practice, the sustainability would just be that it's like being gentle with yourself, and being really mindful of overstimulation, and being and really walking back to be like, "Oh, I think that kinda, like, blew me out a little bit and made my nervous system feel unsafe because I was really destabilizing notions that had been, like, load-bearing I'd felt were, like, load-bearing aspects to my identity." Mm, yeah. Yeah, be nice to yourself. It's funny, it's not funny, but the last section I read was on abuse, and the whole real, like, point of that section is related to the fact that abuse doesn't work in terms of, like, improving ourselves, like, that no and the painfulness of that. And since just in the last few hours, I saw something that was talking about training animals, like an animal trainer, and this reminded me of this notion that I actually, like, had been under consideration when I was, like, working on that section rather, I think that's a better way to put it, and that was that you don't train animals with fear, that if you yell at animals, you just make them think, like, scared of you. And if you cat like a good example is like if you have a cat or a dog and, you come home and they've, like, gone to the bathroom in the house, it's like there's just it's like yelling at them. They're just getting yelled at, you know? that you teach it, like if you're training an animal, and I don't it's I'm just using this as like a nervous system thing, is that like to train an animal, it like what you're doing is like you're dealing with a nervous system, and if you make that nervous system like fearful, it's the same for us. It's the same for us. Like the whole thing. I mean, I think it was like the in the section where the Eileen Kennedy Moore, who's the psychologist and child development specialist, who said that, points out that children don't learn from suffering, but by doing things right. And also a lot of punishment happens before the nervous system. And I mean like just the biological structures exist for more advanced logical processes, which I mean, it's fine for, like, kind of being like, "Hey, this is bad," but, like, the thing about, like, scaring the shit out of people or animals or whatever, it doesn't really just doesn't work, okay? Anyway, so I don't know if that was even worth bringing up, but yeah, it's sad. It's sad. It's sad. I mean, it's just a sad thing. And I'm just gonna kind of reiterate this. It's a sad thing that the harshness, the criticism, the physical abuse, like whatever like spare the rod stuff, like I think that it's not uncommon for people to, like, hold on to some notion that that was done for your own good, and part of what this evaluation is really about the fact that it absolutely is not for your own good, and the reason to deconstruct that is because that that sinks into our own sense of what we require to be our best. And you see this a lot in attitudes about work, that are in attitudes about like what gets the best out of people, it's like that are just there's just no evidence other than like anecdote and this kind of like these sort of like notional things about like, hey, like screaming at people or yelling at people or scaring people or all this kind of stuff like I mean, you get a result, but in terms of like sustaining something, right? You get an immediate result and then like there's the fallout about, kind of what's left behind in terms of other aspects of the personhood. But um yeah, it's a hard reconciliation, but if it wasn't important, we'd leave it. We'd leave it. But the thing with it is it is important because this part of ourselves that sort of maybe covertly believes that these methodologies like these like boot camp. I mean, look, right now you have like boot camp. I don't know if they're as popular, but like like these very hardcore forms of exercise um that aren't sustainable. Like people just wind up getting like like in CrossFit, you've like people getting like rhabdo, was it like dialysis? Like you've got like people getting like chronic injuries. Um, so the sustainability of it. And then you have, and then one of the problem, and I'm gonna keep going. But then one of the problems you have with that is that a lot of identity has been placed into these behaviors of being really intense with oneself, and the idea and so when those aren't accessible, there's kind of a crisis for some folks, even like with working really hard, exercising really hard, people like it's interesting too because as this kind of a side note, a lot of people that get into yoga, it's like if you read look, any yoga studio, I challenge thee, open any yoga studio profile website in your city and look at the teacher profiles. And if 80% of them don't have an origin story of once I was a competitive athlete and then I got injured, I'll send you a free sticker. I'll send you a few stickers. There's a TPM sticker. Here, look, see? Um, Send you a couple. I'll send you I don't know, it's just gotta be something I'd be like, I don't know. But here just the thing and I think it's an interesting thing because like one of the things about yoga is that it's in any of its forms, it's actually bringing us into, like, sort of somatic connection, and that source of revelation and realization and connection is profound, especially when we've been disconnected from ourselves with very, like, intense activities. That can be a lesson we have to learn over and over again too, right? It can be a lesson we have to learn over and over again if we're not incorporating the consideration of this notion and deconstructing it, the idea that like really abuse I mean, I know it's like fucking tough to use this, but like yelling, spanking, punishment, like the way, just things that are like harsh, excessively harsh. I mean, like, I used to, I know that I used to think, like, I understood devotion, but my notion my devoted style behaviors were actually just excessive discipline, like punishing discipline versus kinda, like, showing up for myself with love, and that's part of my own practice right now that's been freaking amazing, amazing to find that it's like, wow, you can actually show up and wanna show up for yourself out of love. And it's like and the intelligence in it is like has a yeah, is much more dynamic. So, yeah, there's that. We've got that going for us. All right, so if we're ready or not, here I come. I'm gonna start reading. So this is the adaptations and holding patterns. We made it. Hooray, go team. So the fourth hub centers around the need to belong. That's at the core of all human life. Our internal standard for who we believe we must be to deserve love is managed by the adaptations in this hub. So, although both inflating and shrinking feel unworthy of love in different ways and to varying extents. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like one of the things that's sort of pointed to, and this is in chapter 2, is that the adaptations and holding patterns also, like, one of the qualities they have is that they masquerade in ways of of the core quality of the hub in its integrity. So I'll go back to, so in the second hub masquerading as being, like, very emotional, like, by being someone who can be really loud but very disconnected. So emotion isn't about, like, the expression, it's, like, connecting that to, like, the inner feeling and also connecting that to being able to synchronize with other people, where it's just it's, like, kind of offloading. Even the things in the third hub where we're talking about, like, the sense of, like, power, neither adaptation actually, like, feels personally powerful. And, so there's always like arrogant people aren't actually confident. It's like, yeah, they're not they're needing the external validation when at the core of the third hub, it really is about the internalized combustion of that it's not seeking external validation. It's not requiring external validation, that your power is emanating from inside of you. It is not needing either someone to tell you you're powerful and give it to you, or you to actually exert your power on other people as a result to like sort of, like kind of, create that. And here we've got behaviors, of like love and belonging that, when we're talking about like at the core, there's a balance of giving and receiving here. And so in the holding patterns, what we're talking about is like part of the behavior is almost like a component of of the hub being like overemphasized and other aspects of it being um you know underemphasized. I don't know, does that work? Okay. You ready? I'm gonna go back in. So the interruptions in the 4th hub are deeply related to shame and interruptions in the lower hubs. So it is the early interruptions that inform our ability to connect with others, and they are often the result of the same familial forces impacting personal power in the 3rd hub. Although both shrinking and inflating adaptations affect feelings of self-worth, shrinking uses a defensive tactic of being inaccessible, and inflating uses an offensive strategy of working tirelessly to be irreplaceable. Yeah. There it is. There she is. All right, so I'm gonna read. The thing I will say is that that it is. I don't know. Sometimes it feels it's like, right, the consistency of this that I can that it really lines up. Yeah, for the most part, it's pretty cool. Good job, Katie. Okay, characteristics of a balanced 4th hub. Balanced is both receptive and generous, has gratitude and the ability to share while maintaining healthy boundaries. Boop. Respects others and does not surrender inner calm to gossip or chaos. Yeah. It's interesting because this goes back to the boundary aspect of, like, what you're allowing into your space. Like, that's the 4th hub boundary. Okay. Can be grateful for simple things. Knows love is not a transaction, yet it has practical aspects. Knows love requires attention, effort, and parity. Mhm. Yeah, like, the notion of love, like, the thing like parity where it's like, "Oh my god, don't go anywhere near talking about, like, balancing," because it's like of course, it's like the thing about, like, turning it into scorekeeping, is like no bueno, but if you've gotten to that point that you're scorekeeping, there's either stuff in terms of, like, your own sense of safety and love and your own work, or even, like, in the relationship, having calling for this sense of justice in it. But it's also, I think, this is my, controversial as it may be, I think that the shaming of the desire for parity really serves people that already are the benefactors of the lack of balance. And by benefactors, I mean getting more out of the energy expenditure in the relationship. Read between the lines on that one, if you will. So, okay, next, appreciates animals and has a relationship with the environment, has balanced and full breath. See how I'm doing? It's really bad. It's like what if I, like, passed out? It's like, um, yeah. Someday when these are better production, I really hope for some, like, high comedy in this. There's the my one notion of, like, adding a puppet to this was, like, immediately kiboshed, so I got it, I get it, I get it. Is mobile and pain-free in the chest and shoulders. Yeah, yep, 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 yep. Be gentle in the chest and shoulders. Yeah, actually, I'll share this, is that in this process that I've been in with the 4th hub in my practice, like, there's, like, it's like I've described it as angina, is like as I'm working in this, there's like a burning. It's not ha it's like it passes. It's good news. Get works through. Passes. It passes. Respects and accepts that people have separate lives outside of its relationship with them. Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting that, because I think that one of the things about the 4th hub, as it will continue to relate as we kind of do the last 3, is, like, this notion of centering oneself, which feels like it's, like, antithetical to this notion of, like, holding a strong sense of self. But the strong sense of self is really, like, really stands in integrity and stands alone. It can stand alone. And the idea that it's like goes back to, I would even call this potentially a 3rd hub issue, is that the idea that other people are really like sort of orbiting around you versus understanding, like in your own sense and your own ability to feel that integrity, that you can understand that that's the same thing that exists within others. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's even kind of a thing I think with like, so-called progressive people in this, and this might be a little off because this is something that sort of came up in a conversation recently, is this idea of other people's realities needing to make sense to you in order for them to be validated. So to be able to understand them in context of your own life and how you live, which is, absolutely unnecessary. But that's another centering. It's like I have to understand how this relates to me versus like this person has a different life than me. Their lived experience is different than mine. And that's just to be curious rather than trying to tack it on to like your lived experience. Like, how does this relate to me as the central character? Feels and is experienced by others as authentic. Its self acceptance inspires others. Yeah, I like what I was just talking about, this kind of quality that of my like me personally right now working in this hub is that the importance to me of being able to like really like have autonomy as it relates to TPM, my own needs in the practice, for me to get past the needs as like an individual to become like a leader for this, which look, it's like I'm not, I'm already like respectively there, but I'm finding places in the work that I'm doing right now that I'm like, oh, I'm really glad I'm doing this because it's like I'm finding that kind of that my hungers for things interfering with my ability to get out of the way for other people's needs. So that's really been worth exploring and sort of loosening and consciously reclaiming that. Just to be safe for other people, honestly. Actively engages in humanizing all people, is curious and open to people being themselves, aware of both the uniqueness and shared humanity of all people. So I guess you could say that actually ties back to what I was just kind of pointing to, which is this thing about like, I need to understand other people for their lived experience to be valid, I mean, like, so one of the things that came up, it was about pronouns and, and just a thing where people like, there are people, like, who like, whether, like, just are not like, anything that relates to, like, non-binary, trans, anything like that, that it's this matter of, like, this needs to make sense relative to the way I understand the world for me to consider it valid. And this is a trap for all forms of, like, of progress with humanization, is that I need to understand this needs to be sort of similar to something I've experienced, which is particularly difficult for folks who have been raised in, like, relative isolation as far as, like, first of all, like, exposure to other cultures. I mean, like, this is, like, try that in a small town shit, just where it's just, like, not being exposed enough to anything. So, it's like the context that's allowed is super limited, and also just, like, for, just needing people to, like, prove to others in a language that, like, works for. I mean, if that's not a power dynamic, I mean, what else is that it's like you're saying, like, I need to understand this in a way it relates to my experience for me to validate it, validate it. I mean, and this is one of the things where we, like, have this, like, apparently unending impasse around racism in America, which is that you've got white people that cannot comprehend what the experience is to grow up in a system of oppression. So there's just, like, a total and, like, the fact that there's still a discussion about whether racism is, like, even real. It really is, like, a symptom of this quality, which is that I need to be able to relate to it for it to be real, versus what we're talking about in terms of the development of this hub is that when someone tells us about who they are and what they need to feel respected and seen, that we just take it at face value. It doesn't need to be run through any kind of ringer. And also, I mean, it's like go deeper than that, which is like, is to, I mean, like, is at the core. It just really, I mean, honestly, just that a human being a human being is just enough. That's it. That's better. But it's like, I mean, of course, it's more complex than this, in terms of the kind of like day to day interaction. But the key point. I mean, there's more, and we'll get more into as we continue. But really, here, as far as like the key, this like really important point is is that somebody doesn't need to explain to you why the way, it's like the validation of how they feel, is like requires like a, you know, it must make sense to you. I mean, it really is. Yeah. So, you ready for characteristics of an out of balance fourth hub? I mean, just like God, imagine somebody is like, I would like you to call me this. Like I'd like you to call me like a name. This is like, and like explains themselves to you, expresses themselves to you. You're like, no, I know more than you do about what you are. It's wild. It's wild. All right. So the out of bounds. So believes connections come from having the same experiences as others. Yeah, see this is it. This is the out of balance. The out of balance is believes connections come from having the same experiences as others. That's exactly like me in an attempt to connect struggles with people who are different. And this is not to say, there are people where just going to be on the like, where there's just effortless connection, and also we'll get into that later in terms of, like, sort of frequency, and there's actually, like, s scientifically validated stuff about connection in terms of, like, friendship. But in terms of being able to even, like, have just, like, human to human, that the only way that you can connect is if the person's familiar. And if the familiarities are, like, it's yeah, that one's, like, kind of a longer talk than I I've got the gas for right now. Alright, so has a hard time understanding anything that is not similar to its own direct experience, tends to orient around its own experience, invalidates the lived experiences of whom others when not matched. Yeah. Well, there's that. So, yeah, struggles. Yeah, and it's funny because I find I have these issues too. I'm not going to, like, I think one of the things also is presenting myself as, like, this is not even an area where I'm like, "Oh, how," like, me othering people that do this. 'Cause I feel this arise in me sometimes. I feel the defensiveness arise in me. And I actually have to, like, actually work through it. Yep. Of course, of course. I mean, it's really easy to think of, like, I mean, there's, like, one of the great ways that this is, it's just dehumanizing, like, stupid people, or dehumanizing people who are unconscious or cruel or shitty, or like, whatever, you know? And that really helps with creating conflict. And also the nuance and the complexity is that it's like, also, it can be dangerous to make space for people that are dehumanizing you, and that's the one exception, or the, like, real true exception, not one exception, but a true exception for creating boundary around people is when they're invalidating your existence. I mean, mm, I mean, it's like, oh, this here we go. I was thinking recently about Native Americans and the mythology that we have in this country about it being discovered when there were millions of people. Still think there are a lot of Americans that don't understand, like, this was millions of human beings on this continent. And it's like, and I think about it as far as the parallel, because now it's like there's an increasing, um kind of like consciousness about, like, we're living on stolen land, like that in certain, even in some professional, like, granted more liberal professional, there, like, there'll be a there'll be a, like, I think it's like a declaration of, like, this is on the stolen land of this tribe. And and so the parallel I draw here is that if the Native Americans, if their ancestors were to come and knock on your door and say, "This is my land," and pull you out of your house and be like, "This was always ours. This was always ours." It's like, I think people would fight back, you know? So, I mean, you look at other, places in the world, notably in the Middle East, Palestine and Israel, it's like the shock that someone fights back. when someone comes back and says, "This is actually ours." All right, we're back. Struggles with either giving or taking will be very good. Sorry, I this it's yeah. These like I'm kind of like opening up like much larger discussions and then stuck back in. So struggles with either giving or taking will be very good at one over the other. So yeah, I mean, this is one of the things in the fourth hub. Receiving receiving is usually the one that people really struggle with, and I would say even people who are, like, takers, as has been mentioned before, are struggle with habit like, receiving, like, feeling but there's, of course, exceptions. There are people that I have people in my life that just take and take and take without even any concept of, like so I guess that is I mean, so maybe I'm just pulling from too much of my own anecdotes here, but so I guess it exists in both. But I will say for people in my life, my people are those who have a kind of receiver thing. Operates from assumptions and generalizations about people. And that's, part of dehumanization of people. And I guess one of the things that's challenging for anyone in this is that, all we have is, like, a limited bit of knowledge around, certain like, cultures and populations. So, it's really like, the antidote is curiosity and genuine interest in, like, how does a human being like, what is the human experience within this cultural context? If you look at the human being when they're talking with them, if it isn't this immediate discomfort, once again, a power dynamic, which is like, I'm supposed to know all the answers. So when I'm talking to you and I don't know everything about your culture, that's making me uncomfortable because I'm supposed to be the powerful person here. It's really about power, so much about power here. Never really like, it's just never been more clear to me. So it's like this thing about like, I need to be, to be a leader means I need to like know more and be in a position of like, and has, so out of balance has difficulty taking deep breaths. And this is something where it's like, even the tightness in the chest is to slowly, not push against it, is to just kind of like slow and just give time and opening into that. Sometimes when that's happening, when you're really expanding capacity simply by just like the presence and the repeated, like delicate, like slight expansions of breath can be very emotional. Has pain, aching, tightness in the chest, upper back, and shoulders. Mhm, mhm. So next we'll read about the shrinking and inflating adaptations. Yeah, okay. I'm gonna stop here actually because I think that's good for now. All right. We did it, guys. So next is shrinking, which actually has a lot of content here. Yeah, for this, yeah, shrinking. Oh, it's interesting. And the inflating. Oh, this is great. And then we get into Ohm's law. Mm. Ohm's law, a holding pattern. I'm gonna read, like, a little bit of this. This was one that was, like, I really held on to because I think it's really important when as it relates to our relationships with people, which is in the beginning here is opposites can attract, but when it comes to emotional voltage, along with the necessary emotional capacity to contain and work through it, the lower voltage always pulls the higher one down. That is unless both voltage sources reach the same potential. So it's a physics calculation. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a physic and this is something that is the reason I put that in there is that, like the savior complex of being like, I wanna you've got people who are validated, and this is also technically reaches back into the third hub, technically it does, about sort of power dynamics of connecting through being like a savior of other people, which we'll get into with the inflating is the fact that the low contribution or even the low capacity is it's going to you're gonna be averaging, and so while the other, like, the lower voltage party is gonna get raised up. It's the physics, baby. It's the physics. Alright, okay, so, yeah, give me some comments. I think I definitely I don't feel like this one, like, left, like, a ton of crumbs here in terms of I don't even know if that's the right term for it. I think it's like this is where we're starting to really open the aperture into where this goes. So, get ready. Yeah, yeah, here we are. So yeah, get ready to open the aperture. Yeah, so again, I just wanna thank you for watching. I wanna thank you for any interaction, like the likes and the comments. Right now, I will say that I'm not thinking a lot about I haven't been in the last couple of months as I've been last month, I'd say, where I've been really getting into the practice of what I need to do within myself to be able to be like a better steward of this content. But I will say that, comments and interaction, likes, shares, whatever, anything, watches, all help with this expanding and reaching people who could potentially really connect with this and help us just continue to like build more consciousness. And my hope is really, I know I needed this, and I know people, like right now with people who are in the TPM verse, having the experience with me. It's just to me the thing is like making this available and accessible to a wider group of people because I needed it really badly personally. And so I think in the service of that, so any interactions is enormously helpful. So sending you a lot of love. I will see you next time. Bye for now.